Thank you for joining our 44 New Voices interview series. My name is Carmela Boykin, and this week we're joined by Eric Eddings, who is so many things. He's a podcast host and producer, he's a TV host and producer, he's a self-proclaimed super nerd, especially growing up. So Eric, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
When our team selected you for our 44 New Voices list, it was right when you were starting producing your show for Quibi for The Nod. But of course, success doesn't happen overnight. We identified you like already after you had quite a long journey. You've been hosting podcasts for Colored Nerds, The Nod with Brittany Luse for 6 years. So going back to the beginning, how did that start? I know you guys have been friends at Howard, but how did you guys decide to do a podcast of all things?
It was kind of an interesting journey, somewhat begrudgingly, I would acknowledge. So Brittany and I, we kind of always fall into these really long conversations. Just anytime our friends get together, we just end up kind of like talking and kind of zigging and zagging through kind of every topic. What did we read? What have we been thinking about? Kind of all those things. And at her birthday party, I want to say about like six and a half years ago now, which is crazy. One of them happened, and we just happened to be at a cigar bar with all our friends, and we ended up talking for like 4.5 hours. Other friends would kind of come into the conversation, come out, and we just like, it was one of those conversations you leave and you feel very kind of like fulfilled, you feel challenged, you kind of like, you're just like, wow, that was good for just talking. And so, we started to think like, how can we capture this? Like we had kind of always wanted to do something together, some sort of creative project. And, we both were fans of The Read, which was kind of like one of the few podcasts we listened to at the time, that and like This American Life. And so we were like, you know what, let's just try a podcast. Let's see if we could just record the conversations that we normally have. Let's see if there's any value there. And so, we had a couple stutter starts, but once we kind of started, we sent it to friends. We sent like 3 of the conversations we had recorded to friends, and we completely expected to be told like, don't do this, stop. Like you can, it's okay, try it, but try something else. But they were actually really encouraging. They were like, we found this really interesting. It made me think about something in kind of a different way. And just that, like that subtle bit of encouragement kind of pushed us to continue. And, we were kind of lucky enough that when we did release it, like people started to respond. And so for us, we were always just like, well, now that people like it, we have to make sure it's good. And so we kept just trying to kind of tinker and see, what's the best we can make our thing. And, that kind of put us on this path to, eventually, I think, bettering how just to talk to each other, how to structure a conversation, how to make it interesting. But it eventually led us to storytelling. And, that kind of from there, things just kind of really started to click. We linked with Gimlet, later bought by Spotify. And we just kind of always had a passion for stories that reflect Black and brown people. And that's kind of like benefited us in so many ways.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned, and you talk about this quite a bit actually, is the importance of not just creating like content, but quality content week after week. So that way when people will watch it, it'll like give you another opportunity to potentially be able to do more things and have those conversations that when someone listens to it, they come away feeling that good feeling like you felt in the cigar bar. So how do you find that you're able to do that week after week with content so that way it doesn't get necessarily repetitive?
Well, I think we love to iterate. So for us, it's not just fun to have if we're having the same conversation each week, we've kind of failed ourselves. And so I think Brittany and I both really like to surprise each other. And so, we're looking for ideas and kind of curiosity in all the time that we're not talking to each other. And because otherwise it's like, let's sit down and talk to Brittany. That's not kind of how we do it. We're out looking for something that makes ourselves think, And because I know if I'm challenged, I know Brittany's going to be challenged by this in a completely different way. And once I've kind of discovered that thing, then it's kind of figuring out, okay, how do I now bring the audience in? Because when you're talking to a friend, there's shorthand. You have shared experiences. You both remember that time we did that thing. We might, if we're talking about a movie, we might have both seen it already. And so we have to do kind of the work to make sure that this interesting conversation that we're getting ready to have, that we can bring as many people into it as possible so they don't feel left out. And that creates a surprising amount of variety. We seek out the things that interest us kind of everywhere. That's where that super nerd thing comes into play, because I'm just interested in way too much. But it's nice because I found that, like, as I start to consume everything, I find connections in places that sometimes surprise me. So
yeah, and you guys have really done that too, specifically talking about the podcast, but even with your Quibi show as well. You guys have so much variety in what you do. In one of your last podcast episodes, you talked about how you guys explored into what grape flavor, like where that came from, how that's rooted in Black culture, and things like 6 Degrees of Black Separation, like a game played off of how you have so much variety in what you do. So in terms of then expanding that beyond like your segments on your show, what was it like getting into your deal with Quibi? Because it's easy to say, oh, and then we had this podcast and it was great, and then we got to deal with Quibi. So how did that evolve?
Well, we had to think about, like, we had been thinking for a long time, like, what are the tools we like to use to kind of tell stories? And we love podcasting. Like, it's, it's a thing that has definitely, like, it's the thing that made people want to listen to what we have to say. But, we had always kind of found some limitations with the form in terms of, like, just how far we can push it. Like Brittany, one of the stories she reported that I really love was about this kind of fashion show in Paris between designers and French designers, kind of like battling almost. And the episode came out great. It was a podcast, it was amazing, but you couldn't see the clothes, you couldn't see the people. And so we had always been kind of thinking in the back of our heads, what would we do if people could see us, or if we could use visuals to kind of support what we're already doing. And so we had always like, we'll jot down notes, we'll talk about it, but things weren't really that serious. And then when Quibi kind of reached out, we started thinking about it seriously. And we were like, oh, well, Quibi is a daily platform, it's short bites. And so we started thinking, like, a lot of our segments and some of our small stories would actually fit really neatly into that type of package. And then we were just like, okay, well, now what else can we pack into it? Because like I said, we like variety, we like surprise. We don't want people to get or expect the same thing every single time. So, we knew we can play a game in 10 minutes. And so we started thinking about the games, that we played like on the show. And 6 Degrees of Black Separation is one of those things where the game is ridiculous. It's surprisingly hard. But it's fun because it just makes you think about all the different ways that Black people are connected. And so, trying to figure out how to get from Halle Berry to maybe like Kendrick Lamar, there's not that much utility in it, but thinking about how all those different people are connected, it kind of reminds you that, one, we accomplish a lot, so many of, and also that Black people kind of in every industry, there's not a ton of us. So we're all kind of have these weird relationships in different types of ways. And so we realized, like, oh, this game that is just doing this thing over 10 minutes actually serves another purpose. So we then start thinking, like, okay, well, how do we tell a story? Who do we want to interview? Who would we want to talk to that will allow us to kind of bring in a new topic or just have a fresh look at something? And we started to see a lot of different types of variety. And so much of that really comes from just thinking about, like, what don't I get kind of everywhere else? And what could happen if there was a space for me? Like, that's often, I think, where a lot of our conversations start. And because we often don't feel like content is really created for us, for our specific types a lot. There's different pieces here and there, but we want to always kind of bring those pieces together. And so that really formed the basis of what the Quibi show kind of came to be. We got limited a bit because of COVID. Obviously, we wanted to do a lot more kind of like field pieces and even some reporting, kind of more close to what the podcast was. But we found so much value in just talking to different people. And this, obviously, last year was so chaotic. I don't even know is the word. You know, and it felt, we realized like basically a month in that we were kind of creating a time capsule. And so if you're creating a time capsule of Black life, you got to get a little bit of everything. You got to get a little bit of pop culture. You got to get a little bit of history. You got to get a little bit of mess. You know, you got to get, if you're really trying to do like each day justice, you got to kind of really pick from a bunch of different spots. And so that made, you know, the sometimes Herculean task of cranking out a show every single day. It made it really hard, but also made it really fun. And looking back, I you know, it's kind of exciting to see just how much we got to play around with.
Yeah, and in terms of representation, as you mentioned, there are definitely significantly less Black people in culture than, or in media than a lot of other groups, specific white people. But what were some of your biggest like influences in becoming like the personality that you are growing up, you know, in the 90s in Memphis, Tennessee? Who are some of the voices that you saw in media that really spoke to you and created the personality you are today?
You'd be surprised. So like a lot of it is my mom, at first I hated it, but I used to listen to Tom Joyner every morning. And on Tom Joyner, like Tom Joyner, it's a pretty, you know, he was pretty like, the show isn't on anymore. I think he just retired, but it was such a fun show. You know, like he wanted the show for everybody in the car. And I remember they would have, like, sometimes he was doing interviews, sometimes he was just talking to other people, but it was always really interesting, accessible, and like kind of fun. Like I remember one of the things that they used to do was this, it was like a radio soap called It's Your World. And it was just like, it's like 3 minutes. They almost don't even connect. Like it's just random scenes. But when it would come on, I was just like, I was riveted. And that would be sandwiched in between an interview that he did, in between music, you know, and in between so many other things. And I think I always appreciated that variety. So I would say definitely Tom Joyner Morning Show, shout out. Also things like Teen Summit. This is maybe aging me a little bit, but it was this like BET kind of panel show. At one point I think it was hosted at one point by Ananda Lewis, who later moved to MTV. But basically it was a bunch of teens and they would just kind of talk about different issues and they would go around and just like everybody kind of got like 30 seconds about, well, what do you think about relationships? Or like what this happened in the Black community today? And like, it was one of those things, it made me really appreciate hearing the different types of opinions that we have. Like so many times I think Black people are painted with a very broad brush. You know, it's kind of wild actually, but we have so much variety and so much diversity of thought. And I think shows like that really piqued my interest in this way that like, oh, we have so many opinions. What if we could really showcase that? What if we had that opportunity? And so I think that was really important to just kind of like challenge me to like look other places, because, you know, if I get one answer, that might be the right answer for that person, but it's not necessarily the right answer for all of us. And then I actually also got to give a big nod to Dick Gregory, like his book, his autobiography, Nigger, really like changed, I think, my like life a bit. I remember I used to, my mom, when I say super nerd, this is real. My mom used to drop me off at Barnes and Noble when she needed to shop, because she knew I wouldn't leave. She could just come back and find me in the aisles. It's probably child abuse, but to just abandon me like that in the store. But I loved it. And I remember I used to just walk through the aisles and see what covers would capture like my attention. And I saw like this book that had like nigger on the front. I was like, whoa, what is this? But I picked it up, and what I found was kind of the story of someone who had realized that they had a responsibility. Like I think Dick Gregory is somebody who, you know, embraced comedy. He realized he was funny, but then as his comedy kind of took him around the world, he continued to experience things, he realized that I can do something with this comedy. And so he started to, I think, really use his comedy as a tool to shine a light on the experiences of Black people. And that challenged me, I think, to take a much deeper look. You know, at the time I was in high school, so I wasn't going to do that much at the moment, but it made it important to me to make sure that I centered Blackness in kind of my career and as I continue, because that light was important. And as now, you know, that I have, you know, this type of platform and you know, we've been lucky to have the career that we have. Thinking back to that, I definitely, I'm so glad that I found that, because it's really important to me today.
Yeah, and you can really see all those things that you just mentioned. As you're talking about it, I keep thinking about like different episodes and stuff, that you really see all those elements really wrapped into your show, and which is super valuable, not only just to be able to explore Black culture and learn more about it, and things that, like, I didn't even know about, and that of course the other people didn't know about as well. And what's cool too is now you're kind of becoming that example for people going forward, and like new voices that are coming after you. So
Crazy.
who are some, yeah, that's the full circle. It's amazing. Who are some new voices that you have your eye on that are up and coming?
I think EVA Ani, who is she's a Black hip hop writer, and she kind of freelances for a bunch of different places. I love her writing. I am very much a fan. Like, I think that female voices in hip hop and in journalism and in hip hop journalism have kind of been relegated to this kind of size spot, like, very often. And her takes are just right. Like, they're just, you know, she is able to get to the story. She's able to, like, kind of pull in, yes, this is how we think about this thing that happened in hip hop, but like, these are the things we haven't been acknowledging all along. And I really appreciate her writing for, you know, how she centers, you know, the experiences of women, and women in hip hop in particular, you know, because I think we're at this kind of inflection point where things could change. You know, we have a lot more, you know, rappers who are women who are becoming extremely successful and kind of leading the vanguard. And I think it takes more female voices to do those artists justice. And I think she's definitely one of them. Let's see, who else? Angelica Jade Bashan. I think I pronounced her last name right. She's a critic for, I think she does most of her work with New York Magazine and Vulture. But like, so for Colored Nerds, our original show really started off of like Brittany and I sending each other articles and things. And a lot of it was just like, we watched this movie, here's the review, you know, let's go deep. And her criticism, her film and TV criticism, really, like, it always like hits me in the face. Like, I'll watch something, think I like it, and then read her take of it, and I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, you are right. I completely missed that. I generally like to look for people who basically make me feel like I was wrong the first time, because I think we all need to be challenged. I think it kind of helps us submit whatever our opinions really are, and I think people who do that work of challenge almost without provocation, like, you know, sometimes there are folks who like say crazy things to make you kind of push yourself. Like, a lot of times comedians, you think of like Dave Chappelle, somebody like that, Chris Rock. But I appreciate critics because I think they do that in a much more subtle way. You know, basically, they're not saying, you know, you're wrong. They're saying, here's what I saw, and here's what I feel it's connected to. So I think those are some of the folks who I watch. I really read everything, so it's hard to narrow a lot of things down. But yeah, it's a really exciting time in media. Actually, one other person, Asted Herndon, I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He is a political writer for the Times, and coming off of last year, he was just, his pulse was always right. Whether he was talking, you know, about the experiences of Black people as they supported or didn't support kind of Joe Biden, you know, whether he was getting a read on, you know, white working class voters and what their opinions, you know, of all of the candidates were. I found it very incisive. I found it very illuminating, and also just representative of kind of how like I think about politics in the world. And that can be really hard when you read the, like Jake Sherman or Maggie Haberman's, like those kind of like big people. No knock to them. But it's nice hearing a different voice. And I think a lot of the people coming into media are less held back by the rules. And I think he definitely is people.
Amazing. And then in terms of for you going forward and what's next for you, in October of 2020, Quibi announced that it was closing. But what is next for you? I'm sure you have so many things going and you're an incredibly busy person. So what is next for you going forward? What can we expect?
Yeah, we are actually probably going to be coming back to podcasting, which we're really excited about. So Brittany and I are kind of working on 2 projects. One I can't talk that much about and one I maybe can. But we're likely going to relaunch For Colored Nerds and kind of bring back, kind of that old podcast that we have and really keep that going. So I'm really excited about that. I think we've been working kind of some fresh approaches to kind of how we used to do things there. But then we were working on something else that's a little more kind of narrative focused and involves a lot more reporting and storytelling. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, that could be coming to you soon. So I think we're coming back to podcasting, but we're also actually trying to leave a lot of space to kind of see what happens. We're still interested in TV. We've got some ideas kind of cooking there. But we really love telling stories. And so we're kind of, it's weird. I feel like I'm like 3 weeks from being able to be like, I'm so glad you asked me that question. But we have some exciting things coming that will get us back into storytelling and just like talking about Black people and culture, which is, I think, very much our bag. So.
Fantastic. We'll have to stay tuned. I'm very excited. Even though you can't say what it is, I'm sure it'll be fantastic. One last question. You've said before in high school that you were a super nerd, like we talked about, and that you were khaki dominant. Would you say that, are you still khaki dominant? You're serving a look right now, but has it evolved?
I am. So mostly since quarantine. So, okay. My mom was just not about jeans. I don't know what it was. Like, she was not about jeans. And then especially in high school, our school like switched to uniforms. We used to have like, you could wear whatever you want. And then uniforms came and my mom was like, yes, because she bought those khakis. And I was like, well, Mom, this is just my school uniform. I don't have to wear this outside. She was like, you have pants. You are going to wear those pants however you need to in whatever combination. So yeah, so everything had khakis to go with it. Since quarantine has happened, jeans, it's restrictive. There's a lot going on. If you just walk around your house, a chino is a nice respite from everything, that you might have been experiencing. People talk about sweatpants and sweatpants are great. But a nice pair of chinos will also kind of elevate your look in the house, while still giving you that range of motion that I think we all like. So yes, I am still khaki dominant, although I play around with the colors a little more. So.
Iconic. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us this week. And make sure you tune in for our next 44 New Voices interview.
Thank you.